Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm Jake Ziegler, and I'm here with Brad Garoon. On Never Did It, we look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. Today we're covering the year 1978, and we have a very special guest with us, the first ever three-time guest on the Never Did It podcast, the one and only Professor Jeff Richardson. Jeff, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be back for my third time. I'm super excited. Thank you guys for having me. I know you're going to introduce the films in a second. I did want to say one thing before you do that, which is that when you asked me if I wanted to come back on again, and I was looking at the list of films that were available, you guys have all these great films. I was remembering my first two appearances, and I felt a little guilty that for each of those episodes, the first film we started with, you guys talked about it, and then you sent it to me, and you said, Jeff, why'd you want to talk about this movie? And both times I said, I want to talk about the other movie. I don't actually want to talk about this movie. This week, when you guys come to me, doesn't matter which film you pick. This was my goal, and I accomplished it. And it doesn't matter which film you pick. I'm going to say, I love this movie, and I want to talk about it.
Let's start with Death on the Nile, because I'm just eager to get to it. So I recommended Death on the Nile. I'm a giant Agatha Christie head. I love murder mysteries. I love Peter Ustinov. He's the second person to become famous for playing Hercule Poirot in film. The first was Albert Finney in Murder on the Orient Express, for which he won the Academy Award for Best Actor, which was crazy because he's awful.
Wow, I've never seen that. Yeah, I've never seen
the movie. Is quite good. He is playing it like Mr. Bean. It could not be more different than what Peter Ustinov is doing. But this one came out in 1978. It stars, like I said, Peter Ustinov as Hercule Poirot. You've got Angela Everyone in this movie is dead, pretty much. A lot of them died just last year. It's got Angela Lansbury, Mia Farrow, still alive, Simon McCorkindale, David Niven, rest in peace, Betty Davis, rest in peace, Maggie Smith, rest in peace, Olivia Hussey, recently rest in peace, John Finch, rest in peace, Jack Warden, rest in peace, Jane Birkin, recently rest in peace, the great George Kennedy, rest in peace. The list goes on and on. Louis Childs.
She's alive, I think. Yeah.
Lois Childs, yeah, yep.
Still alive. So the movie is about Louis Childs is a very wealthy woman whose friend, Mia Farrow, comes to her with her new boyfriend, Simon. The very sexy Simon, maybe not much going on upstairs, but very good looking. And immediately, Louis Childs, in the role of Lynette, steals him away and marries him and goes on their honeymoon on a river cruise down the Nile, which I am dying to do. I would kill to go on a river cruise down the Nile. And Mia Farrow decides she's going to crash the party, and she harasses them along the river cruise. And then because it's an Agatha Christie type story, a host of other people who also like tangentially know each other but not really show up, and they all have something to say about the heiress and rich bitch Lynette.
It's amazing how they all have a motive for murder.
Yep. And then wouldn't you know, after a big tantrum, Lynette wakes up dead. And we have to figure out who shot Lynette, and everyone has a motive, like Jeff said. So I adore this movie. This is one where I don't always, if I've seen them recently enough, I don't always rewatch the movies. This one I was like, are you kidding me? I'll rewatch it twice. It was directed by John Guillermin. I actually don't know how to pronounce his name.
I've never heard of him. Honestly, even I'd seen this movie before, and I was still like, I've never seen that name.
More importantly, it was shot by Jack Cardiff, who shot like Black Narcissus and
Red Shoes.
Red Shoes, right? So he's a big Colin Pressburger guy, and the movie looks dynamite. There's so many cool shots in it. I've said enough. Jake, what'd you think of Jeff? You've seen it before, so Jake, what did you think of Death on the Nile?
Oh, what a delight. Yeah, just a totally delightful movie. And I've seen the crappy remakes that Branagh did, which is really disappointing because I like Kenneth Branagh, but like those remakes are all kind of not good. But still, the story surprised me because even though I had seen, this Death on the Nile, this newer version, I don't remember anything about it. So this movie still had the ability to, surprise me and delight me. I thought, it was 2 hours and 20 minutes. So I did think it took a little bit of time to get going, but like once it took off after like those first 15 or 20 minutes, it was, it was just smooth sailing from there. A lot of great jokes in it. Like I said, the performances are all excellent. Motives shifting and just the way Poirot figures out the story. I mean, it's all great. It's just a great movie.
Jeff, you'd seen it before?
I had seen it. First of all, I love this movie, and I'm here to talk about it. Yes, I had seen this only a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I had actually seen Peter Ustinov in Evil Under the Sun like 4 or 5 years ago, which he made as playing Poirot later. I think like 5 or 6 years later. I can't remember.
Well, he did 6 of these.
Oh, right. He did TV ones too, right?
Yeah, there were 3 in theaters. This, Evil Under the Sun, and the one after that, and then 3 for BBC, 2 of which take place in like modern times. They're pretty bad. But Evil Under the Sun is fun.
Yeah, Evil on the Sun, I remember thinking it was pretty good. So I was somewhat familiar with Ustinov as Poirot, and I was familiar with Poirot from my mom is a real Anglophile, and we grew up watching PBS mystery stuff, and so there's some really good Poirot stuff there. So yeah, I was just eager to watch it. I think the remake was either had already come out or was coming out. I hadn't seen it yet, but I was just, put it on, and yeah, I instantly loved it. I mean, the performances, the cast is just spectacular. The performances are all delightful. I love a good murder mystery. Like I guess I already hinted at that with all the Poirot stuff. But the thing that I guess I have to say about it the most is it's just the location shooting is just like mind blowing. I mean, it's just like for people, I don't know if this was said already, but like they filmed it. It's not just set on the Nile. Like they filmed it on the Nile. They were on a boat in the Nile. Like all those movie stars that Brad just named were on a boat in the Nile in like 120-degree heat, apparently, like filming this movie for like 6 or 7 weeks. And I just love that. And you can tell, I mean, you can watch the movie and you can just see that, yeah, they're there. And there's like, they're next to these monuments and the pyramids and all the other, Karnak or whatever. I mean, all these other, landmarks. And it's so fun to just be in that world where you're like, this is really like, I don't know, just Betty Davis on the Nile. I mean, come on, like it's amazing. So it's hard to sort of put into words why that gives me so much joy, but I just love the fact that like there's this perfectly delightful, fun movie that is just like filmed on the Nile. That's like my big takeaway. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you guys felt that too, but it's just something, I don't know, cinematically primal about that, I guess.
Yeah. It just reminded me of like, there are shots where I'm like, you didn't have to make this look like Lawrence of Arabia. This is just a silly murder mystery. And then there's like all these deep focus shots, or like when they're at Karnak, or not Karnak, when they're at one of the other monuments where everyone's walking around and they're about to drop the stone near Lynette, which we later find out, I think George Kennedy, that was his attempt at her life.
Yeah.
There's just like quietly panning across this gorgeous monument, and every character gets like 3 seconds to show that they're also watching her. So you suspect everyone. It's so well done. Poirot
That's an incredibly well done scene. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to just second that.
Yeah.
That's like probably the best part of the movie is like, it's like incredibly well put together, that whole sequence. It's fantastic.
It's wild. The other one is Poirot's in his bathroom, and someone has put, actually, I don't know if we ever figured out who put the snake in his bathroom.
It's ridiculous.
I think it was Mia Farrow.
Mia Farrow.
Yeah, but how?
Are these the questions we really need to be asking here? Come on.
So there's an asp, a full-on cobra in the bathroom. They use deep focus to both look at Poirot, who is like stone cold, so cool in every shot except this one, because he can't outsmart a snake. So he's freaking out, he's sweating balls, and he's doing his SOS knocking on the door. So his best buddy David Niven, who by the way was his real life friend, they served together during World War II. Ustinov was awesome. Niven's like bagman or Batman or whatever it was, which I just love.
I didn't know that.
So the way I found out was I Googled, were David Niven and Peter Sellers friends in real life? Because they worked together a bunch. Nope. But David Niven and Peter Ustinov were great friends, and they only worked together twice. They made a one of those propaganda films during the war together, and then this. And then Nivens runs in and uses the sword hidden in his cane to stab the snake. This movie is incredible. And then there's like a lot of other great scenes, like the way they construct the diversion for the murder, where Simon gets shot, but then not really shot. So I saw this for the first time many years ago and watched it for a second time just now. And when they were revealing the second shot, I was like, right, the nail polish. Oh my God, I totally forgot. Just great stuff. There's not a single bad performance in the bunch. There's one death scene, I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen the movie, that legitimately shocked me.
I'll say that the very ending, even though I'd just seen it like 2 or 3 years ago and I had seen the remake, I totally forgot the very ending. Like there's also a climactic death,
it's different. It's handled slightly differently in the remake.
In the remake. Okay. Maybe that's why I forgot it was coming. I don't know. But that actually shocked me this time, even though I saw this movie 3 times.
It's dark.
3 years ago. Yeah.
That's what kind of shocked me about it, is I was thinking about like, oh yeah, this is gonna be such a fun, murder mystery thing, and then it was like, yeah, there's a couple things where like there's that one character who just gets so violently murdered, and you know, like with the Lynette murder, you kind of see it, but it also kind of happens off camera. But like there's the one that is not off camera at all, and it was kind of shocking. Yeah.
With the Lynette murder, what I loved was because Poirot has to go through how everyone could have done it, you see her get shot in the head like 5 times.
Yeah, exactly.
How did this get past the ratings board? This is crazy.
And to Jake's point, the movie is a little long, 2 hours and 20 minutes. And even though I delight in watching it, there are parts while they're going through all the potential ways people could have done it where it's like, well, this is pretty much the exact same way as that other character. Yeah. You know, there's a little bit of, okay, can we speed this up, Peter? You know, Poirot. We said not a bad performance. I love the performances. Shout out to Betty Davis and Maggie Smith, like bickering. But the one is that I really want to highlight is Angela Lansbury, who you already mentioned. I mean, it is a great performance. It is, I would argue, it's borderline camp at times, which is not necessarily a criticism. Again, I love this movie. It's just like she is going all out in some of those sequences, and it's just delightful to watch.
Well, we should say she's like 3 sheets the entire movie.
Yes. Yes.
You ever wondered what it would look like to see Angela Lansbury on a tear?
Yeah. This is Pop's drunk. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also really like that they inserted some like the writers were annoyed political commentary into it. Like John Finch's character is a communist agitator, and this movie clearly hates communism so much. So every time he talks, someone's like, "You're a fucking idiot." But it was weird to see him because just a couple months ago, I went to the film forum to see Frenzy, Hitchcock's Frenzy, and Finch is the star of that, but he plays like a really tough, bearded, like British, not thug, but like a tough British guy. And he's so the opposite in this. Everyone's like capital A acting in this movie.
Which is why it's so much fun.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, because they're not holding back.
It's great.
Good fun.
I mean, it's Knives Out. I mean, obviously you can. I mean, that's such an easy comparison to make today. But you know, you got these big casts and a murder mystery, and the same thing. Like everyone in Knives Out is doing just this great, you know, these meaty parts, and this reminded me of that. I mean, I don't think Ryan Johnson had to have been influenced by.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, any murder mystery is going to be influenced by like an Agatha Christie type of thing. But I mean, I think that's the easiest comparison to make for modern. Since I mean, I wouldn't watch the remakes of these movies. You know, you just watch Knives Out and you get a much better experience.
What kills me about the remakes is the way they try to imbue Poirot with all this backstory and tragedy. And it's just like not at all what is interesting about these kinds of movies. Like it's fun in Glass Onion to see that Benoit Blanc has a boyfriend. Beyond that, I do not want to know anything about him. Unless it's funny, I don't want to know.
Right.
And importantly, it doesn't factor into the plot of the movie at all.
I hated the remake, and I watched it shortly after I saw this. I can't remember how long after, but hated is maybe a strong word. I mean, it was a fun cast also, that movie. What I loved about this, I mean, you know, I love a lot of things about this, but again, I love the location shooting. Death on the Nile, the remake is clearly all green screen. I mean, you never feel like you're in Egypt. And to me, it's like everything I hate about, you know, and I love modern filmmaking, and I watch a lot of movies. I love a lot of movies, but the things I really hate that so much is like green screen and feels fake and feels phony. And then it makes me suspicious of things that maybe aren't green screen. I'm like, well, did they just do that on a computer? I don't know. It's the whole thing with modern filmmaking that drives me crazy. I do love the location shooting. I love knowing that the hotel that they go to in this movie, apparently Agatha Christie wrote Death on the Nile in that hotel. It's a real hotel. It's still there today. So Brad, when you go on your Nile cruise, you can stay at the same hotel where they filmed this movie and where Agatha Christie wrote the story. And then to just, you know, we're going to spend all this money, Kenneth Branagh, get this huge cast together. And I mean, there's probably, I don't know, maybe there's current political reasons or budget reasons, tax break reasons why they wouldn't be able to do this today. But still, like, it's just not nearly as good. It was totally disappointing. I really did not enjoy the remake.
I'd go in the opposite direction. First off, I feel the same, but I'd go in the opposite direction and say, look at Adam Sandler's career. His whole shtick is he's going to get Netflix to give him a ton of money to go on vacation and film in interesting places. Why do you even make Death on the Nile if you're not going to, you don't have to go to the Nile, go to Morocco. You know what I mean? Like, go anywhere in North Africa. You can go to Morocco. Morocco is gorgeous. But I just don't get the point of even doing this movie if you're not going to use the locations.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Whatever. Branagh's an idiot. I haven't seen Haunting in Venice, which I actually hear is like a little bit better than the other ones, but that could be because it all takes place in a house, so you don't have to like get mad at this stuff. Anyway, I like Evil Under the Sun quite a bit. It's basically like Diana Rigg is doing the Lynette character. You know, she's a bitch everybody hates, she dies, and they're on vacation. Yeah. So, and you again get to see big Peter Ustinov on the beach, like trying to deal with the hot weather. So that one I recommend, and I can't so much recommend any of the other Ustinov Poirot movies because they're all pretty low budge and not so good.
Do you have a favorite murder mystery, since you seem really like beyond
it's this
Poirot?
One.
Okay.
It's this one. Yeah, it's Death
This
on
is
the
like
Nile.
like all the murder mysteries you've seen. This is like your top.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
cool.
this, and then Knives Out comes kind of close, actually. But
I love Knives Out. Yeah.
just want to take a second to talk about Peter Ustinov in general, who is so underrated in like the big swath of film history. Probably most famous for Spartacus, for being like the second best part of Spartacus after Charles Lawton. Those two just being like the comic relief of a movie that you wouldn't expect to have comic relief is incredible. But he also has a big part in Logan's Run. He's sort of like the narrative end of that movie. And then there's this great comedy where he's also with Maggie Smith called Hot Millions, where it's a con man movie. And he's in a movie made by Frank Capra with Humphrey Bogart called We're No Angels, which was remade by Robert De Niro and Sean Penn, but it's terrible. The original is like really fun. Anyway, Ustinov, this great raconteur that I think deserves a lot more love. And I'm so glad we finally got to talk about a movie of his on the podcast.
Well, I want to ask Jeff what your favorite murder mystery is, but I'd also like to tell a story from, because Jeff and I have known each other for a very long time, over 30 years now. And when we were in high school, we had a friend of ours named Nick. Brad, you're familiar with Nick, at least you know people who know Nick. But Nick, we would get together and we would make movies. Like we did this in high school. Nick had like the camera and all the equipment and everything, and he knew, he was the technical end of that. But anyway, when we'd always be talking about our movies, Jeff always wanted to imbue some sort of murder mystery aspect into our films, so much so that like the ones that we did end up getting, that we did end up making and like finishing, there's lots of like jokes about that, about like Jeff wanting it to be a murder mystery and everything. Like we hit on that a couple of times. So this is I was really glad that Jeff picked this, because like, oh good, now I can tell the story about how Jeff has long been obsessed with murder mysteries and has always wanted to make one and be in one.
It's true. And the Knives Out movies have just been like a godsend. I mean, because they're so well done, and it's like just kind of awesome that murder mysteries have had this little moment. The movie I would shout out, which I don't know that it's my favorite, but I watched it, I think the same time I watched Evil Under the Sun. It's called The Last of Sheila. You guys heard of this? Or
yeah,
this?
that one's really good.
That's a really cool movie. Yeah, I just thought it's more like a puzzle movie as much as a murder mystery, but it's really fun movie. So I would just shout that out as like a great.
The worst one I think ever made is Murder by Death.
Oh, loved Murder by Death when I was a kid. When I was
because you were racist.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I thought that Peter Sellers dressing up as an Asian man was hilarious. Yeah, probably I did. I don't know. I mean, I was like 10 years old. I thought it was amazing. I did rewatch it maybe 10 years ago or so and had to cringe quite a bit.
I couldn't believe how unfunny it was. I mean, if you're going to do yellowface in a movie, at least like make the jokes be good.
Yeah, well,
it's very famous because it's the, I think, only movie that Truman Capote was in,
and he's very memorable in it. Actually, in a kind of creepy and weird way.
Do we have Oscar stuff to talk about?
One Oscar, one Oscar that Death on the Nile nominated for, and one Oscar, and that was for costume design.
I don't know what the other nominees were, but totally deserved without knowing that, because the costumes are incredible.
Lansbury should have gotten nominated.
That's a bold statement.
I believe it.
Okay. The music is terrific. Actually, we didn't mention Nina Rota of The Godfather, and like Fellini and stuff actually wrote the score, and there's a terrific like overture during the opening credits. So that's just another thing that this movie has going for it.
The way that the alumni of The Godfather infiltrated the movies of 1978 is like very surprising. Like Mario Puzo wrote Superman.
Wow.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Gates of Heaven.
Days of Heaven.
Days of Heaven. I'm sorry. When you recommended this movie, I thought it was a different movie. I didn't watch the other movie, but I thought it was the Jeff Bridges Heaven's Gate movie. And I was like, oh, this will be interesting to talk about. Isn't that movie like known to be a complete disaster? This one's not a disaster. Tell us about, I already forgot the name.
Days of Heaven.
Days of Heaven. This was actually one. I don't know, Jeff. Maybe you want to introduce me, because this is one I only discovered because of you. I think because
really.
Yeah, because I'd seen the Thin Red Line when that came out, and I was a big fan of that, despite how mad my girlfriend at the time was for making her go to it with me. After getting into Malick, I'm pretty sure you recommended for me Badlands and Days of Heaven, because I think you had seen them.
That's probably right.
Yeah, so I think it was because of you that I ever saw Days of Heaven in the first place.
Well, yeah, I can intro it. Days of Heaven, Terrence Malick, his second film. It's a really kind of a simple little story of a love triangle, just to get it out there quickly. Richard Gere, this is, I think, his first movie, if not his first movie, one of his second movie. Yeah, second movie. He and Brooke Adams are a couple. Linda Mance plays Richard Gere's younger sister, and they sort of flee Chicago at the start of the movie, perhaps because Richard Gere's killed someone. We don't actually know that for sure, but they head out to the panhandle of Texas to work on the wheat fields. And there they get in a love triangle with the farmer. Who is simply named the farmer, played by Sam Shepard. There's really not a lot more to say about the plot. I mean, it's not really a narrative-heavy film. It's not really a character-heavy film. If you've seen a Terrence Malick movie before, that probably wouldn't be a surprise. I was actually thinking about this. I don't know, this might seem like a really stupid comparison to make, but I think because David Lynch was in my head because he passed away recently. And then I was thinking about Terrence Malick because of this, and I was like, oh, they both went to the early AFI film school. And I feel like, you know, when you're thinking about Terrence Malick, he's kind of like a Lynchian figure to me because he's really like an artist. And not to say that other film directors aren't artists, but his focus really seems to be like, I'm going to make the cinema is my art, you know, and I'm going to make my piece of art. And the end results are very different for David Lynch, but I think he does the same sort of process where it's like, I'm interested in surrealism and subconscious. And so my movies are going to be very different than Terrence Malick's movies, but it's really like my artistic process and the result is my art, you know, not to sound like pretentious. And I think Terrence Malick is kind of the same, you know, if you've seen a David Lynch movie, I think you sort of get what I'm getting at. So Terrence Malick is kind of the same thing, except he's not surrealist or it's a subconscious. He's really a philosopher. He actually taught philosophy. He went to Harvard, was a Rhodes Scholar. I mean, he's like a deeply philosophical background, seems to be very interested in religion. And so his end result movies, you know, these are sort of very different than David Lynch, but it's the same sort of thing in my mind. I sort of was grouping those together. So whether or not that vibes for you or not, it's just sort of my way of sort of, I guess, presenting Terrence Malick as sort of this unique filmmaker. I've always, this is one of my favorite movies, I would say. I mean, I don't have like a top 10 or maybe I've never really tried to do that, but if I was making a short list, this would be on there. As would The Thin Red Line, his follow-up to this film, which he made 20 years later. Didn't make a movie for 20 years or 19 years, whatever it was. Those, I think, even The New World, which he made after The Thin Red Line, which I think is a little less beloved, I think of as probably one of my favorite movies. So you know, he's probably made 3 of my favorite movies. I also think Badlands and The Tree of Life are really interesting films, but it's just really kind of a big vision, and it's uses the language of cinema, sound and image, you know, like almost nothing else. So that, I don't know.
Yeah, and I recommended it because, Jeff, I'm with you. I think this movie is amazing. I love Terrence Malick movies in general. There's actually, shockingly, I was looking at those. Oh yeah, there's 2 I never got around to seeing because I remember the reviews were kind of poor, and they're more recent ones, Song to Song and A Knight's Cup, or whatever that was.
Knight of Cups.
Knight of Cups. Yeah, there we go. So those 2 I haven't seen, but I did see A Hidden Life, which is his most recent one, which also did very cinematically, film, you know, shot and everything. I've liked all the other movies. Yeah, I love Badlands. I love Thin Red Line. I love Tree of Life. So I love a lot of these. And Days of Heaven, his first 2 movies are interesting. Days of Heaven and Badlands are both a little bit more grounded than I think some of his other movies, and there is a little bit more focus on the characters than you would get in some of the later movies. Whereas, I mean, like Thin Red Line is so much about what's happening around the characters versus what's actually, you know, happening to the characters. But that's why I recommended it for you, Brad, because I love this movie and I thought it was great. I wanted a chance to rewatch it, and I was hoping that you would love it too.
I thought it was okay. No, I liked it, and I felt pretty removed from it. I think Badlands is like a pretty regular movie. I like it a lot. I think anyone can watch Badlands and feel connected to it. I don't think that it's hard to access at all. I turned off Tree of Life after 20 minutes. That was the year it came out. I haven't tried again. And I've never seen The Thin Red Line, and I've always been really interested in it. That is all to say I'm not a huge Malick guy. This movie looks incredible. There are scenes that are shots that I don't understand how they're possible. Like the locusts. Basically anything regards the locusts. I don't like it. It's not CG. So what did they do to get the shot of all the locusts flying out with the cast in the shot? Jeff, it seems like you have an answer.
I do. I actually learned this just recently when I was preparing for this podcast. They shot for those who haven't seen it, it's a shot of the workers in a field, 2 different shots actually. And you see there's a plague of locusts and they're taking off. And so like flying past the actors and everything. And it's not CGI. It's actually, they dropped peanut shells from an airplane and reversed the footage and had the actors move backwards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That looks so convincing.
Yeah, apparently it was Nestor Almondros's idea, and he ended up to sort of jump on Jake. He ended up winning the cinematographer Oscar that year. So pretty crafty guy.
Wow. Well, that shot alone is worth at least YouTubing in as high resolution as possible. That shot, but the movie's interesting. There's a few things about it that I bumped up against, and one of them was Linda Mann's. So she narrates the film, and she does that because Malick did not know how to make the movie. It took him 2 years to put the movie together. So this is a funny story about the Thin Red Line that I'm sure you both know, but our audience might not, that no one knew when they were making the movie whether or not they were going to be in the movie. And I think like Jim Caviezel for sure did not know he was the main character of that movie.
No, I think Adrian Brody thought it was going to be his breakout role, famously, and he's in like 2 scenes and like has maybe 1 line of dialogue.
So I just read something similar actually about Stranger Things season 5. They shot 650 hours of footage for Stranger Things season 5 so they could make every episode feature length. Now, it's not going to be a 650 hour season, but there's going to be a ton of stuff on the cutting room floor. Malick does the same thing. He shoots a ton of coverage. It's like the opposite of what Clint Eastwood does. He shoots all the coverage in the world. Eastwood's like, it's done. We're getting out of here. And he doesn't know what the movie's going to be. And apparently the movie didn't really hang together, at least to his liking. It didn't hang together. So he brings in Mans. He doesn't bring in Mans. She's in the movie. She's the little sister. And for some reason, she has a Bronx accent, even though they're from Chicago. This is a problem with all movies from the 70s and 80s, where people were not dialect trained. She narrates the movie, but she's not really narrating what's happening in the movie. Like you said, it's not really about what's happening. She's just sort of narrating like a childlike vision of her life. And I forget the name of the writer who did this, but I read all of her narration posted as poems, and I think they're very affecting. And I think in her voice, they sound really stupid. And I was really distracted by it throughout the movie. I just think for me, it was a performance issue. It's about a love triangle, but the stakes are super low because it doesn't really seem to matter what happens. We're told that the farmer is dying. That super never plays into anything. He maybe he isn't dying. I mean, we don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that does come into play because that's the whole reason that Richard Gere encourages his girlfriend to marry him, is because they think he's going to die soon, and then they're going to inherit, they'll inherit his money, and then they'll, it goes sour for them when he doesn't immediately start dying. Like the narration says, maybe some doctor came and gave him medicine, I don't know, and she wouldn't know. So like it made sense for her to give that narration. But I think his health or lack of health or whatever his condition is, I think that it definitely plays into it. But the reason that it's not entirely clear is because our narrator, it was never clear to her, so it wouldn't be clear to to us seeing that story. I mean, they were under the impression that he was very sick and would die soon, but then that doesn't end up happening, and then that prolongs the relationship between the girlfriend and the farmer, who's played, by the way, by Sam Shepard. I don't know if we've seen that, and easy to fall in love with Sam Shepard. I mean, what a good looking fella, and also rest in peace, Sam Shepard. We lost him a couple of years ago.
I think your point is well taken, that like, but it also shows like the narration was really just to sort of like help the movie move forward, because nothing we're seeing is going to help the movie move forward. Now, there's a lot of cool things to see. Any scene where there's furniture set up in a field, I think is super neat. It's just like not what you expect. Jake, I know you watched the newest episode of Severance. Jeff, I don't know if you watched this show. I'm not going to spoil anything. First off, you should watch this show. There was a great episode. There's a field in a building, like a mountain, a grassy knoll in a building, basically, and people have to set up their office on top of this grass. It's very cool, I think. And this movie is very cinematically informed. Like there's a shot in last night's episode of Severance that is taken off of the cover of Being John Malkovich. So this movie, this show loves movies. And when I watched the scene, I looked at my wife and I said, he's doing a Tears of Heaven. Or is it Tears of Heaven? What am I doing?
Days of Heaven.
Days of Heaven. Doing a Days of Heaven. Any shot like that is very cool. I don't know. I just like, it's short, right?
90 minutes. I guess, I'll just say that like, it's short. It moves quickly for me. And I think that you said you felt removed, which is, I think, totally fair reaction, because that's clearly intentional. I was watching a couple extras on the Criterion DVD that I got from the library, and John Bailey does the camera operation for this movie. He would later go on to be a big cinematographer. He was actually president of the Academy, I just learned. But this was one of, he was the camera operator at the time, and he was talking about the movie, and he said the second unit on this movie is actually first unit, meaning that the second unit shots, all the insert shots of all that stuff, that's actually first unit material in this film, because the background, either way you want to think about it, the background is foreground or everything is background. And I like that phrase, everything is background. And I think other people talk about sort of, you feel a distance when you said you felt removed, there's a distance. And I always think of the fragmentation, especially the first half of the movie. There's just little sequences. Everything is very short. There's almost no scenes with with lots of dialogue. It's usually, a couple of things back and forth, and then we move on. Maybe we get some voiceover. Everything is sort of And then we'll cut to the animals, and we'll cut to the nature, and we'll cut to the wind blowing through the fields. We'll cut to the windmill going. And there's this sort of, sense that like this little story that we're seeing is just part of the fields. It's just part of the animals. So when I watch this movie, like I totally get it if somebody feels removed, but for me, it like makes the whole of it gives me like a great emotion and feeling. And I do sort of, I said Malick's interest is in philosophy and religion. And I think that it's a very small story that feels epic to me. There's biblical echoes in this. I'm not a Bible religion person. I know that the title that Brad can't remember is actually, it's from Deuteronomy. And, if you obey the commandments, your lives will be as days of heaven upon the earth. And then of course there's a plague of locusts, which I know is, biblical thing. But also, I think all the shots of nature, the wind blowing, I mean, whether or not it's God or it's just nature, there's sort of this transcendent force at work during this movie. And you even get like a couple overhead shots when the locusts show up from the top of the kitchen that sort of feel very hand of the divine or hand of like a higher power. I feel like this is sort of all part of the intention of this film. And so if it doesn't really click for you and, you don't really get, if you don't really get on board with it, the story itself is going to be pretty insignificant, I would say. But just to me, that's kind of part of it, is that it's really part of a whole. And so I end up feeling like the whole movie is kind of, the voiceover is a huge part of it. I love the voiceover, but I feel like it's a memory. Like, I feel like the whole movie feels like a memory. I feel like the fragmentation makes it feel like a memory. You're just getting bits and pieces of the field work at a time. You're getting bits and pieces of conversations, just like you might remember them. And then you're getting this very nostalgic, but also extremely dark narration throughout the film from a child, from a very, and I find a very memorable voiceover. The quality of her voice is so memorable. And so, it works for me. But I'm not surprised to hear you say you felt removed. Yeah, because I feel like that's almost intentional.
Well, it's for sure what he's going for, because all of his movies are like that.
Yeah, especially since, you're right, since Days of Heaven. I think he sort of learned this technique. Badlands is a little different. Yeah. But I feel like he definitely learned this trying to put together this movie.
A movie that I think does a similar thing as what you're talking about, but in a way that resonates a little more with me. Like, for example, when I knew I wasn't in love with the movie was, spoiler alert, when Richard Gere kicks the bucket at the end, I felt nothing. It wasn't staged for drama. It was sort of just like, this was inevitable, which it sort of does feel like that's the way it's going the whole movie. And that's fine, but it just didn't like bring me back in. And I also didn't care about him very much because he's such a dick. So when that happened and I felt that way, I was like, okay, so this is where I'm at with this movie. A movie that I think does it's a memory, it's little pieces here and there, that does it in the same kind of thing, but in a completely different way. Like, I don't know if anyone would ever compare these movies, is Furiosa, which is a whole movie that is basically told over a campfire by this guy with tattoos on his face about stories he's heard about this woman. And it's all got like sort of a dreamy sheen over it. And I've seen people be like, oh, it's just more CGI than Fury Road. But I actually think that's deliberate, because this is a story being told after Fury Road has happened about a woman who informed that movie. And so you're seeing it in like a dreamy way. And I thought that the most when they show this shot of the two inbred brothers standing over her and like looking down, and the shot sort of like shimmers, and that in a very like Lynchian, aesthetically Lynchian kind of way. And I was like, this whole movie is not, we're not seeing what's happening. We're seeing someone's recollection of this movie. Granted, I was high as fuck when I saw the movie. So those are the kind of thoughts I was having. But now I might watch that again today.
I love that comparison. That's really interesting. I wouldn't have made that comparison at all. And I love Furiosa. So that's wild.
And then I only know that Jake hasn't seen this movie because we talked about the year that it was in last week. But Jeff, have you seen Black Narcissus?
I've never seen it. No. I always wanted. I'm actually like a big Powell Pressburger never did it guy. I mean, it's like title after title. I'm like, oh, this is a classic. This is a classic. This is a classic. I haven't seen any of them.
I felt so I'll keep this real short. I felt the exact same way about Black Narcissus that I felt about Days of Heaven. Got it. In that it's one of the most unbelievable looking movies you'll ever see. Powell and Pressburger use Technicolor like basically nobody else ever. I mean, Red Shoes looks crazy. Even like Colonel Blimp, which is not really about that, looks crazy. Black Narcissus looks better than both of those movies, and is also just like, man, this narrative is just kind of not hitting for me, but I'll watch it. I would watch this movie on mute. I mean, I'd be cool with that. And I felt that way about Days of Heaven also. Like, what a cool looking movie about people I'm not so interested in.
Can I have one more segment here on Days of Heaven, which is really a tangent that I just want to get out there, out into the world, something that's been building up in me for, I would say, about a decade, which is, and I'll try to keep this very brief, but I just want to say a thing about voiceover, because I have opinions about voiceover, and I feel like And when I was first getting into film, and especially when I was like learning about screenwriting, and you're told voiceover is bad, voiceover is lazy, voiceover is just, show don't tell, it's just stupid exposition. And then you start to learn more and you see more movies, and then you think, okay, I think the more consensus opinion is that, voiceover is a tool, and that, a lot of great filmmakers, whether it's Double Indemnity or Apocalypse Now or the Royal Tenenbaums, have used voiceover well, but those are sort of the exceptions, and you've got to be careful. And I think that is the dominant opinion. And I've been sort of like bucking up against this in the back of my head for the last 10 years, I would say. And I just have to get this off my chest, that I don't even think that's correct. Voiceover is good. I love voiceover. Give me more voiceover. Voiceover is not something to be avoided. It is cinematic. It is central to cinema. Moving human voices over moving images is something no other art can do. Storytelling is being told a story, which is what voiceover is so good at. And I'm thinking about all the filmmakers that I like that use voiceover lately. David Fincher just used it in The Killer. I thought was fantastic. And, Wes Anderson uses it all the time. But even little examples. I was thinking about Fried Green Tomatoes, which is just a silly little 90s nostalgic movie where Jessica Tandy's telling a story to Kathy Bates. So we go back and then she's telling, oh, we all worked at the Whistle Stop Cafe. And then you can see the Whistle Stop Cafe. You don't really need that. But I want to be told a story by Jessica Tandy. And so anyway, to end my rant.
I'm going to cut you off real quick. Yeah. That movie stinks. I just watched it. That movie is not a light, silly movie. It's about cannibalism.
Oh, that's true. It is. Yeah.
And that's one I was about to bring it up as an example of a time when voiceover narration doesn't work.
Terrific. Tell me a story. Peter Falk and the Princess Bride. Tell me the story, Grandpa. I want a narrator. I love it. It should be in more movies, more voiceover, please.
The problem, I think, and I think that this is actually the predominant way that voiceover is used, is not that voiceover exists or is a crutch. The problem is when it is a crutch, and it's used poorly when it is redundant to what is happening in the story. Like we see something happen and then it's told back to us. For example, I watched this movie Wild Target, which is a remake of a probably good French comedy, and it's a terrible British comedy starring Bill Nighy and Emily Blunt. And in it, we're told stuff that we're shown. And it's just like, shut up!
I think that almost every example of voiceover I can think of, it adds a quality to the film, even if it's extra exposition. I'd much rather have that than have it in dialogue where a character, like, whatever that meme recently from Madam Web about, my grandfather in the Amazon one, that is to me 10 times worse than a little extra exposition in a voiceover that is probably adding an extra element quality to the film that wouldn't be there without that telling a story aspect. So that's my agree to disagree. That's my voiceover take. I had to get it out there. Please make more movies with voiceover.
Okay. I feel like a weird person to argue against you because I produced like 7 seasons of a podcast that utilized a narrator as a central conceit.
That's funny.
Like you can't do a radio play without a narrator.
Well, that's
really.
True. Yeah.
And I don't think that narration has to be utilitarian. In fact, I think, like you, I think it's actually better when it's part of the art of the movie. It sounds like what you're advocating for is to just have a narrator for the sake of it, and that's annoying.
I'm just saying, don't hesitate. I'm saying if a film feels that there could be a narrator here or voiceover here, go for it, because it's a cinematic technique. It's not antithetical to cinema. It should be considered a very cinematic device. That's my argument. So don't force it, but don't hesitate.
I would love to have a conversation with both of you about just like tools used in movies in general and when we should put a cap on them, because of the AI discussion going on now around Adrian Brody's performance in The Brutalist, to which I say, shut up. That movie is amazing. And if adding some AI to change his accent a little bit made the movie better, should we disqualify anyone if anything CG appears on their body in a movie? Now, you can get into the ethics of AI utilizing work of people who are not credited for that work. I think that's a really reasonable discussion to have, and an important one, and we shouldn't be putting everybody out of work until we have an alternative for work, which we don't have. But I think I'm thinking about it in terms of like CG, especially because a little bit of CG, first off, we don't see most CG. We don't notice most CG in movies. Like we didn't notice that the locusts were peanuts.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me.
Please fool me. Like, I want to be fooled. Like,
yeah,
exactly. Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to be fooled. That is to say, back to the narration thing, if I notice it, like if it's really sticking out to me, it's gonna, in a Jane Austen movie, if Anya Taylor-Joy is narrating it, that's baked into the story because it's a story that Jane Austen wrote and Emma, the character, probably narrated it in the book. And so that works. Or like in Fleischman is in Trouble, I was just talking to a colleague of mine about this. So the TV show Fleischman is in Trouble, Jesse Eisenberg's character starts to take a back seat as the show goes on, because the book is narrated by the female lead, who is not Claire Danes. I forget her name, from Party Down. So she starts to take on a bigger role, even though she doesn't seem like as important of a character. But it does that because that's the structure of this story. And she's narrating the whole thing, and then she becomes a bigger character as the story goes on. Totally cool with that. It didn't like work for me. I understand why it happened. But a lot of narration, especially in these like B movies, and Days of Heaven is far from a B movie. And I'm not talking about Days of Heaven, although it happened in Days of Heaven, it's used because the movie doesn't make sense. Like what they cut doesn't make sense. So like, I'll just tell you what you're supposed to know now. And I think that's crap.
You're probably right. Yeah. Or are they fixing the movie? Just devil's advocate. Are they saving it because it doesn't bother me?
They are, but fix it better. Is all I'm saying. Fix it different.
There's a great. We just talked about a movie that I think has one of the best uses of voiceover narration ever. We just did. We covered Adaptation a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's. I mean, I don't know if there's any better use of voiceover narration than there is in that movie, and especially when Brian Cox calls it out. You know, it's like God hilarious if you use voiceover narration. You know,
hilarious.
Well, but then you have to say like most people only started even noticing voiceover narration as a crutch in movies when Brian Cox said it in Adaptation. So that's the reason most people are mad about it.
Probably.
I think also Stranger Than Fiction is just like a really cool way to play on voiceover narration. Cool. Like that's a cool movie. And then Emma Thompson like does great things as the omniscient and then not so omniscient narrator. And and you can do cool things like you mentioned The Killer, which is such an underrated movie. Michael Fassbender doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about.
Yes. So, I know. It's hilarious. I mean,
that's what makes that's what makes it so good.
Yeah.
But it's not just there. It's because you learn like, oh, he's bad at his job.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me the platform to get that off my chest.
No, it's good.
Yeah, Oscars, and also just right before I get into Oscars, like Jeff, you said so much of what I love about the movie. You and I are just like 100% on the same page about this movie. I think it's just I think it's beautiful. Everything that you said about it, like I wish I could have put it that way. I don't really have much more to add, but I do love it. It's a 5-star movie for me. Oscar wise, it actually did pretty good. Not up for any of the big awards, but it did win cinematography as we mentioned. And then it was also nominated for costume design, sound, and the score by Ennio Morricone, of course, is also outstanding. So cinematography is the only one it won, but 4 Oscar nominations, not so bad.
Cool. All right, let's do our 1978 lists. And as always, guests first.
Really excited to have another chance to sort of delve into a year like I did with the last time. And if you remember, I rewatched multiple movies and watched multiple new movies just for that podcast last time. And I was so excited to plan out my watching for this podcast. I watched Days of Heaven and Death on the Nile. That was literally everything I added. So I didn't do any of my never did it. I did not take this opportunity to cross, and I have a couple big ones, but I still have a top 10 list here. Some of these I haven't seen in a while, but I will give a very brief honorable mention because I assume Jake's going to mention it, and I just don't know how to rank it, to The Last Waltz, which is just a great concert film from this year. So my number 10 is The Great Train Robbery, which is a Michael Crichton directed Victorian heist movie with Sean Connery and Donald Sutherland. I haven't seen it in probably 20 years or more, probably. I was probably a teenager when I saw it. I read all of Michael Crichton's books, and this was one of his books, and he directed the adaptation. And I just remember thinking it was a lot of fun. It was sort of a light heist movie and I think Sean Connery was hilarious is my memory of this, so put it in there at number 10. Number 9, Same Time Next Year, weird movie, Alan Alda and Ellen Burstyn having an affair. And so the whole movie is scenes of their affair at this inn, and then they meet same time next year, and they meet up. So once a year they have an affair, and then they talk about what's changed in their lives. And it's a very, very corny, sentimental, melodramatic movie with a very sappy score. It's directed by Robert Mulligan, and I saw it on, I flipped through cable like 15 years ago, and it was starting up in the opening credits, and I ended up watching the whole thing, and even with commercial breaks, and I just couldn't believe I kept watching this corny movie, and just those two performers just kind of made it super memorable. I couldn't turn it off. Number 8 is Dawn of the Dead. George Romero's zombie sequel to Night of the Living Dead. It's one of the first of a few horror movies on my list, and I'm not a horror movie guy. My wife doesn't like horror movies, but loves zombie movies. Night of the Living Dead is a huge movie in our household. We probably watch it every couple of years. Same with 28 Days Later. And this is somewhat blasphemous, but same with the remake of Dawn of the Dead, Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead from 2004. We love that movie. I had never seen the original, and weirdly until I think 2 years ago. It's pretty good. I was again, I said blasphemous. I prefer the Zack Snyder version. This is pretty, even though it's pretty much exactly the same things happen, so I can see why people feel like, why bother remaking it if it's in the original. But
because you want real actors saying the lines in a normal way.
Yeah, it's just a little low budget, right? Yeah, so it's just a little low budget. So I'm putting it here for respect because I do really like Night of the Living Dead. I really like the third movie, Day of the Dead, which is also pretty low budget. They're all low budget. But Dawn of the Dead, yeah, it was good. It was solid. My number 7 is Girlfriends, Claudia Wilde's like indie New York movie that's basically if you like Greta Gerwig, I think people compare this to Frances Ha, so if you're like Frances Ha and you want to see like the ancestor of that movie, watch Girlfriends. Also very low budget, independent film, but it's really cool to see New York in the 70s and see just sort of that sort of style of filmmaking. Number 6 is the second Michael Crichton film on my list, Coma. Somehow he had 2 movies come out in 1978. Coma's Michael Douglas. Actress, I want to say Genevieve Bujold, something like that. I forget her name. It's just a really well-made thriller. I've seen it a couple times. Super solid 70s sort of. It kind of fits in that sort of paranoia genre of maybe Parallax View and 3 Days of the Condor. So if you like those movies, I would check out Coma. It's a hospital thriller. And then my number 5 is Piranha. Joe Dante, very low budget, very stupid. Do not have high expectations, but if you appreciate a campy, silly, very cheap horror movie, Piranha is fantastic. I only saw that I think a year ago and just really enjoyed Piranha, but you have to set your expectations right. Number 4, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the remake, just really well made. I actually haven't seen this one in like 10 or 15 years, so it's not that fresh in my memory, but I remember really loving it. Jeff Goldblum, Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams. The only other movie I've ever seen Brooke Adams in is in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So this was a big year for her, and I don't know that she has a lot of dialogue in this movie. She certainly doesn't in Days of Heaven.
She's kind of a big character. I watched it kind of recently, like a year ago.
Yeah.
She's
why didn't she have a bigger career? Because she's so like
not a good actor.
I mean, is that it? Because it's hard to tell in Days of Heaven because she's real. I think she's terrific in the Days of Heaven, but she doesn't have to do very much.
Yeah, she's not honest.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of like, can she just not act? I don't know. But anyway, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, number 4. Number 3, Death on the Nile. I love it. Number 2 is Halloween. I didn't really like Halloween the first time I saw it. John Carpenter's classic. And I'm not a huge horror movie fan, but somehow over the years, I've seen this 4 or 5 times, and when I think of it, I just get a warm feeling. I just picture not even Michael Myers or the killings. It's just Jamie Lee Curtis carrying her book bags, walking down the street with the leaves falling and that score playing. And it's just a very magical movie memory for me. So I have it way up there at number 2. And then my number 1 is Days of Heaven.
Wow. Our lists are different. Jake, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll do mine. I only have a top 5. I've seen 8 films from 1978. And the good news is I didn't dislike any of them, like some years. So one of the movies from 1978 that I have, I'll just hit a couple honorable mentions, is Scorsese had a short documentary come out that year called American Boy, a profile of Stephen Prince. I think you can see it on the Criterion channel now. That's a good short documentary. And then my other 2 honorable mentions, more traditional honorable mentions, would be the Warren Beatty film Heaven Can Wait. I haven't seen it in a very long time, but I do have good memories of that. And my other honorable mention would be Grease, which is a fun musical. Watched it not too long ago with my daughter Finn, and I was so proud of her. Within like the first probably 5 minutes of the movie, she looks at me and goes, Dad, how old are these people? So I was just really happy that she noticed that right off the bat.
Wait, you mean they're not in high school?
Yeah, right. Yeah, what? John Travolta's like 30, and what was Stockard Channing was like 38 or something.
Wow.
Yeah, the real crime is Michael Tucci, who looks like he's 50.
Yeah. Oh, for real. But Grease, it's not I don't think it's the greatest, but it's reasonably fun, and there's some good songs in it. So those are my honorable mentions. And then in my top 5, my number 5 is Death on the Nile, which we talked about at length. Just really tremendous fun. Good movie. My number 4, Jeff just talked about Halloween, the John Carpenter film, which I also saw fairly recently, like within the last couple of years for the first time. I hadn't seen it for, I don't know if there was really any reason, but I hadn't. So I watched that fairly recently. And yeah, it's one of the best horror movies. I mean, Carpenter's great, great director. The score is fantastic. Jamie Lee Curtis is so good in it. I mean, the villain obviously is super memorable. Yeah, the original Halloween is really, really great. My number 3 is a film that I think has probably aged poorly, but I have not seen it in a long time, and my rating of it on Letterboxd is at a 5-star rating because it's a very, very famous comedy, is National Lampoon's Animal House. Yeah, a lot of that movie wouldn't play so well with modern sensibilities, but as far as its influence and what it was like at or for how big it was at the time, I certainly understand. But and there's still I'm sure there's still funny stuff in it. I haven't seen it in a very long time. And my number 2, Jeff, you didn't mention this earlier. Since I don't have as many movies to fill up my list, I am including the concert/documentary The Last Waltz. Brad and I were actually just talking about this recently, like if we consider concert films and documentaries to be the same thing, and we both agreed that really no, we don't. Like Stop Making Sense, the Talking Heads film, which we covered on the show, Stop Making Sense was like a straight concert movie. There's like really nothing else going on there. But like The Last Waltz, I think you can consider both a concert film and a documentary because they have all this stuff kind of in between where they actually talk to the band and they talk about the history and all this other stuff. So there's a bit more of a mix there. But The Last Waltz is just completely up my alley. I mean, it's the band, one of the greatest rock bands of all time. Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Van Morrison. It's just a laundry list. Eric Clapton. Zoom sucks now, but just this amazing list of performers. Mavis Staples and the Staple Singers singing The Weight with the band. One of the single greatest live performances I think ever captured on film. The Last Waltz, I think, is essential viewing, I think, for just about anyone with an interest in film or music. Yeah.
Shout out to Van Morrison, who somehow, probably my least favorite person in that movie as far musically, but steals the movie almost. I mean, he's like incredible in that. So anyway.
Yeah, Van Morrison's performance is so good. Also famous for Scorsese having to digitally edit the cocaine out of Neil Young's nose so that you couldn't actually see the giant. It's just fantastic. What a great movie. And then, like Jeff, my number 1 is Days of Heaven.
So my list is quite different from y'all's, and there's a couple on my list that I'm surprised you haven't seen, but I just looked through Letterboxd and saw that you don't have them marked. So I have 4 honorable mentions. One is Dawn of the Dead, which honestly looks like garbage. What works about the movie, I think, is that the cast is only 4 people. So you get really tied into what happens to them or whether they live or die. Like everything feels like a big deal because there just aren't that many people to sacrifice. But Sarah Polley's not in this, so it's not as good as the remake.
Agreed.
I've got Days of Heaven, my honorable mentions. I don't know if it was this week or last week, but I mentioned Interiors sometime recently. It's a Woody Allen movie. That's solid, but it was his first serious movie. This is very strange because of another movie on my list, but he's making an Ingmar Bergman movie. It works in some ways and it doesn't work in some ways. There's a few shots that are crazy good, and then most of the movie is just like pretty boring, and everyone's really awful. So, except for Sam Waterston, who I would have sex with. So hot in this movie. And then Superman, the movie, which was story by Mario Puzo. Good movie. It's way too long. I don't know. I only watched it recently, and the sci-fi stuff is kind of boring. When you have Christopher Reeve come in doing the Clark Kent and Superman switch off, it's gold. And everything else is just sort of whatever. Yeah,
I agree completely, and I almost had Christopher Reeve as an honorable mention just like alone, just because I don't really like Superman, but I think he's so incredible.
Incredible.
So yeah.
The problem is there's a big chunk of the movie where he's not playing Superman. It's someone else, and it's like a little boy and then a teenager, and they're not good. But Christopher Reeve is incredible. He has to just be Superman for a lot of it, and that's not as interesting as when he's Clark Kent. All right, so my number 10 is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Yeah, pretty good. It has one of the most uncomfortable shots in any horror movie where, so they're clones, basically. They're like clones, vegetable people clones, and one of them is trying to be a dog, but it gets confused and has a human face, and that made me want to throw up.
Yes.
It was just a mask on a dog, and it still makes me want to throw up.
Yeah.
My number 9 is The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Krabat, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. It's a Brad Garoon list. It's a Czechoslovakian animated film. The story, the source material, the Czechoslovakian story that it comes from is very influential on Disney. The Disney Sorcerer's Apprentice took from this, the doing chores with your magic, that comes from this story. The Sword in the Stone pulled a lot from this story. The Black Cauldron pulled a decent amount from this story. But this movie came out after 2 of those, and it's cutout animation, which is an interesting and kind of lost art because it's the original animated movies are all cutout animation. They're basically drawings cut out and then moved in stop motion, but some of the transitions, the magic transitions when people transform, so cool in this. That's just a story about a boy who gets basically kidnapped and put into servitude by a wizard and has to get out of it. Pretty violent for a kids movie. Pretty cool though. My number 8 is Howard Zief's House Calls. So this stars Walter Matthau and Glenda Jackson, and it was the first movie they did together because Hopscotch came out 2 years later. But if you want to see their other collaboration, it's this. Matthau plays a surgeon, and it's a romantic comedy. And he's a dick in it, and it's quite good. I like it a lot. My number 7 is Grease. I think Grease is underrated. I think Grease is actually very good. And the hold it has on me from my childhood is strong. So this is why Interiors is weird. My number 6 is Autumn Sonata, which is an Ingmar Bergman movie. It was his last theatrical film. It was Ingrid Bergman's last movie, period. She died not too long after this. And it was the only collaboration between the two of them.
And no relation.
No relation, right. And they only got together at the end.
Yeah.
So the movie is Ingrid Bergman plays this classical pianist. She was very famous. And in her older age, she goes to visit her daughter, played by the incomparable Liv Ullmann. And they have it out. And that is what Interiors is also about, basically. So it's weird that these movies came out in the same year.
Deep Impact Armageddon style.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Dante's Peak Volcano.
This is better than Dante's Peak or Volcano.
Boy, are you
Well,
sure?
I don't know about that. You're talking to a disaster movie aficionado over here, so
yeah.
be
This
careful.
is better than Dante's Peak and Volcano. It's better than Armageddon, but might not be better than Deep Impact.
Fair enough.
So, no, I really like Autumn Sonata. It's very talky. It's basically just these two women talking. Sometimes Liv Ullmann's husband chimes in. To Jeff's earlier point, he narrates a little bit of the movie, but not most of it, which is kind of odd. Like he breaks the fourth wall and talks to the audience in the beginning, which is also very Woody Allen-ish. They're kind of like playing off each other with these movies, which is super interesting.
Yeah.
Neither movie is funny, but Autumn Sonata may be a little bit funnier than Interiors. My number 5 is Martin Ritt's Casey's Shadow. So no one has seen this movie. Martin Ritt is more famous for making movies starring... He's so beautiful. What's his name? Help me. HUD.
Paul Newman. Paul Newman.
Martin Ritt makes
HUD,
Paul Newman
right?
movies. Yeah, HUD. He also made Casey's Shadow. So this is, what if Walter Matthau ran a ranch and had to deal with a horse that was lame? Could he make the horse sound? This movie's actually pretty heavy duty. Reminded me a lot of the Iron Claw. I saw it before Iron Claw. Actually, Iron Claw reminded me a lot of this movie. I have it on DVD. I don't know if you can watch it anywhere. It was on Tubi for a while, but really worth checking out. The only thing this movie doesn't have going for it is Walter Matthau's trying to do a Southern accent. It's actually very good. My number 4 is Watership Down. So Martin Rosen is a very interesting figure in animated movie history. He's not an animator, but he really liked Watership Down, and he wanted to make it into a movie. And I think he was a radio broadcaster. He had money from something, and he was like, all right, I'll produce Watership Down. So he ended up making this and one other movie, The Plague Dogs, which is also very good. But the way he got into it was he brought in John Hughley, who was a very famous animator. He did stuff like Moonbird was the big one.
I've seen that.
Yeah. So this is what's really interesting about this movie. The opening scene is the creation story of rabbits. Watership Down is a story about a group of rabbits trying to survive. The opening scene is the creation story of rabbits. There's a god figure. There's the original like Adam of rabbits, and it's done in a very surrealistic kind of animation style. But Rosen didn't like that style, so Hughley got fired. He only did that first scene, and then the rest of the movie is done in a very different, more realistic looking style. And then so is Plague Dogs. Anyway, this movie's harrowing as hell. It's also super violent for a movie that gets shown to kids a lot, and I think it's great. My number 3 is an early Jackie Chan movie called Drunken Master. It's a blast. If you like Kung Fu and you haven't seen Drunken Master, you need to see Drunken Master. And then my number 2 is the one that is most baffling to me that you guys haven't seen. It's The Deer Hunter.
Yeah, I was waiting for one of you to mention that because that was my big never did it.
Never did it for me. That's the best picture winner and a big never did it for me.
What happened? I'm like waiting for it to come up.
Actually, before you say what you like about it, I can actually tell you I tried to watch The Deer Hunter like 10 years ago. This is my memory. I put it on. There was like a wedding. 45 minutes later, they were still in the wedding.
Yeah, that's great.
I turned off the movie and I was like, I'm going to finish this later. And now it's 10 years later and I still have not gone back to The Deer Hunter. And I know everybody who's seen it loves it. But I was just like, isn't that movie just a never ending wedding? Like that was, anyway, that's my take on The Deer Hunter.
Okay, so the first thing
it's great.
The first thing I was going to say was this movie has all the balls in the world. There's a 30-minute wedding at the beginning of it. But the wedding tells you everything you need to know about the characters. It's the dynamic between De Niro and Streep and Walken. These are and how does Cazale fit into all of it? Streep and Cazale met on this movie and they were together until Cazale died. It is known that the production of this movie was like a monster, and honestly it's one of those ones where it paid off. It's like Apocalypse Now, which came out a little bit later. It totally paid off. All the scenes in Vietnam will make you feel like you should never go into even like a closet ever again. They're so claustrophobic. And then I've never seen a movie that tells the story of post-trauma from a soldier as well as this one does, because it's not just the trauma that the soldier endured from the war, it's the trauma that people endure when they come home when they're worried about their friends who are also in the war. The second half of the movie is about De Niro trying to help Walken, and Walken's beyond help. It's so sad. It's tough, right? You know this. It's The Deer Hunter. You know about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's one of the best war movies of all time, and you know about it for a reason. And it's crazy to me. It's like, it's blowing my mind that you guys haven't seen. This is as crazy as Jake not having seen the Dollars trilogy.
Oh, yeah. Well.
Yeah. And I feel like maybe I did watch it like a long time ago, but I just, I can't be certain that I did. So it's, that's a real top of the list. Never did it for me.
You had me thinking that maybe it wasn't a 1978 movie. I was like, how is it that's not on your list? Anyway, my number one is Death on the Nile.
Oh, nice. Wow.
Yeah.
I forgot you hadn't said that yet.
Yeah, I love Death on the Nile.
Yeah.
It's my number
I mean,
one.
I have it number 3, so it's not like...
It was my number 3 until this rewatch, and then I bumped up to number 1. And I've seen... Maybe I need to rewatch Drunken Master again to give that a fair shake. But I've seen Deer Hunter recently. So
it's funny. I probably would have had Death on the Nile near the middle of my list, maybe 6 or 7 even, until this rewatch. And it's just, I feel like it's actually weird because it's a murder mystery, but it's better the second time. It's just fun,
I said in my review of it, it's so much more rewarding to watch a second time because you can see all the pieces be set up much better.
Yeah.
And a lot of murder mysteries, the pieces actually are never set up, and it's all just waiting for the detective to tell you how it all worked out at the end. And this does both. Cool. Jeff, this was great. We're going to have you on again next week. He's not going anywhere.
Can't wait.
Because we're all wearing the same clothes next week to talk about the Nitties, the first ever Never Did It Awards, Jake Ziegler's brilliant brainchild. See you then.